I'm going to read out a report from the BBC in today's vote on the welfare reform measures. But before getting to that, just to be absolutely clear where I lie with this, um, you know, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll know that I'm hardline on issues like crime. It's fair to say I'm to the right on issues around crime. On welfare, I'm to the left. This is an example of where my views on a particular issue do vary. Vary regarding on what the issue is. I believe that successive governments have used the welfare system, they've weaponized it to stigmatize and scapegoat the unemployed. And honestly, whenever I hear the terms welfare reform, I think it's just code word for let's see what punitive measures we can introduce. Let's see how we can scapegoat the unemployed even more than they already are. I've been through the system a few times, at times when I've had no choice but to sign on, and anyone who thinks it's easy hasn't been through it. Um, so, I this happened on the Tories' watch, and it's what you expect from them. But see a Labour government using exactly the same language, basically, is contemptible, quite honestly. I think Rachel Reeves, Liz Kendall, and Keir Starmer um, will have a lot to answer for when it comes to people feeling that they're being pushed over the edge. I think it's an absolute disgrace. So my stance is that the way people perceive the welfare system, or I shouldn't say people, some people perceive it, is not the way the Daily Mail and the Sun and so on portray it to be. What they do is they take extreme cases of welfare fraud and present it as a whole thing. The reality is not what those people who may be buy into that stuff think it is. Um, it's just not. And I feel depressed and angry about the way successive governments, but particularly a Labour government, is doing this. The government's won the vote, but they did have to make concessions. My local MP, Lewis Atkinson, voted for it, and he gave his reasons why. I thought he was towing the party line a bit. I wasn't very impressed by his response. He said that he was listening to the concerns of local people, including disabled claimants. I'm sure he has had meetings. I can't, say that he hasn't, but it did sound like towing the party line. And I don't think that he understands the anger. I don't think a lot of MPs understand the anger and the sense of anxiety that a lot of claimants feel. I give a lot of credit to those MPs who did rebel and vote against it. Anyway, I'm just going to read out because the details are important, but there's other things to take into account. This will be a longer video, so bear with me. I think it's an important thing. The reports by Kate Wanell and Brian Wheeler. Hopefully it won't get cut off. The other laptop's a bit low in space, so hopefully it won't get cut off. The government has won a vote on its benefits bill by 75 votes, but only after law offering last-minute concessions to Labour rebels. Ministers have already watered down their plans once by reversing some cuts to universal credit and protecting parent claimants of personal independence payment, that's PIP, from stricter eligibility rules. However, some Labour MPs were still concerned the new criteria for claiming PIP will come into force before the recommendations or review could be implemented. Fearing a humiliating defeat, the government announced a further U-turn, saying it would not change PIP rules until it had time to consider the review's conclusions. The 11th hour changes leave the government's universal credit and personal independence payment bill gutted of its most significant measures. The move undermines Sir Keir's authority, which has been called into question by a series of U-turns recently, and that of Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall. It also puts pressure on Chancellor Rachel Reeves' spending plans, as potential savings of around £5 billion will now be delayed or lost entirely. Helen Miller, incoming director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies think tank, said the figures would intensify the speculation over the summer about which taxes may rise and by how much. She said it raised questions about the government's credibility, adding it doesn't bode well for those hoping this government will grasp the nettle and address the deeper structural challenges facing the UK public finances. Speaking after the vote, Kendall said, "I wish we had got to this point in a different way." She said there were lessons learned from the process, but defended the bill, arguing it put in place really important reforms to help those who can back into work. She insisted Labour MPs were 100% behind the Prime Minister. Following a tumultuous few hours in Parliament, MPs voted by 335 votes to 260 to give the bill their initial approval. The result saw the government's working majority cut from 165 to 75. MPs will continue to scrutinise the bill when it returns to the House of Commons on Wednesday, the 9th of July. Ministers had hoped changes made last week had convinced wavering rebels to back the bill, but during the debate, many still expressed concerns. Less than 2 hours before the final vote, Disability Minister Sir Stephen Timms told MPs the government was making further compromises by removing sections of the bill which have introduced new PIP eligibility rules. "We will move straight under the wider review and only make changes to PIP eligibility activity and descriptive following that review," he told MPs. Several MPs expressed anger and frustration at the last-minute changes. Labour MP Paula Barker said, "Whilst grateful for the concessions, this has further laid bare the incoherent and symbolic nature of this process. It is the most unedifying spectacle I have ever seen." Labour's Mary Kelly Foy told MPs, "I popped out for a banana earlier on, and when I came back things had changed again, so I'm even more unclear on what I'm voting for." After the vote had taken place, Labour's Ian Lavery told the BBC, "This is an absolute shambles. I've never seen anything like it." Both the Liberal Democrats and Conservatives criticised the process and said the bill should be pulled entirely, although I imagine they have different reasons for that. The government initially announced its plans for a shake-up of the benefit system in March, including measures to limit eligibility for PIP, the main disability benefit in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and freeze the health-related element of universal credit. Alongside the measures, it promised a £1 billion package of support to help disabled people and those with long-term conditions into work. Defending the proposals, the government has pointed to steep rises in the numbers claiming benefits and said making changes was the only way to ensure the system remains sustainable in the future. Ministers have also said the current setup left people dependent on welfare without giving them proper help to find work. However, for weeks there had been growing discontent in Labour ranks and feared it would push people into poverty. Last week, more than 120 MPs threatened to block the bill, leading the government to say it would change the legislation to ensure the stricter rules would only apply to those claiming after November 2026 rather than existing claimants. It also reversed plans to freeze the higher rate of universal credit for existing health-related claimants, although new applicants would still get reduced payments. The move was enough to convince some Labour MPs, including Dame Meg Hillier, who had led efforts to block the bill. Speaking during the debate on Tuesday, she said she would be backing the government's bill, but warned ministers not to ignore backbenchers' opinions in future. But her party colleague Rachel Maskell told MPs she would still be opposing the bill, adding, "These Dickensian cuts belong to a different era and a different party. They are far, far from what this Labour Party is for." The pressure from backbench MPs led to Sir Stephen's announcement in the House of Commons that the government would only make changes to PIP after the review has concluded. Despite the multiple climb downs, 49 Labour MPs voted to block the bill. At times, Tuesday's debate highlighted a breakdown of trust between the government and its own backbenchers. Even those Labour MPs who were persuaded by the PIP's concessions said they would vote against the bill at a later stage if ministers did not hold true to the word. There was particular confusion about what Sir Stephen's promise to remove tighter PIPs tests from the bill would mean in practice and whether MPs would get say over it. Coming near the end here. Speaking afterwards, one of the rebels, Emma Lewell, said it was absolute utter chaos and no serious way to make legislation. South Shields MP told the BBC, "This is messing with disabled people's lives. They've already been through hell since we first announced this bill, and then today they'll not know what the hell's going on, because quite frankly, neither do MPs know what's going on." Another rebel, Richard Bergum, said, "If the government doesn't deliver on its promises on personal independence payments, don't take out cuts to universal credit, there is a possibility this bill could still be defeated. It is only a week to go, but still a long week is a long time in politics." Following the vote, Charlotte Gill from the MS Society, that must be Multiple Sclerosis Society, said, "We thought last week's so-called concessions were last minute, but these panicked 11-hour changes still don't fix the rush per the thought-out bill." John Sparks, Chief Executive of learning disability charity MenCap, said the changes sounded positive, adding, "We are pleased that the government has listened." James Taylor, Executive Director at the Disability Charity Scope, would still strip thousands of pounds in support from future universal credit claimants and urge the government to engage with disabled people. Okay, so there's a lot of information to take in there. I'll put a link to that report. Um, so the government's won, but only by making concessions, and 49 rebels still voted against that. I give those people credit. I think Rachel Reeves and Liz Kendall are absolutely hell bent on having a draconian hardline system. And here's the thing: there's politics come into this. They're never going to come out and say, we want to punish the unemployed. You know, they're going to use euphemisms like we believe in helping give opportunities to people back into work and so on. Now, personally, of course, I'm not against giving people opportunities to get into work. But a big part that's missing in all of this debate is the sanctions culture in the DWP. Once again, it gets overlooked. It's all very well saying that we're going to put pressure on claimants having more obligations. But, you know, that excludes the fact that it's up to employers to actually offer job interviews and to offer jobs. I've mentioned before, I think that the 35-hour mandated job search is absolutely ridiculous. If you apply for job after job, um, if you fill in CVs, if you do practice interviews, even with all of that, it's not really realistic. I think very few people can fill in 35 hours on a job search. Um, you know, because you can't apply for jobs that you don't have a background in. That's just ridiculous. For example, if you have a background in teaching, you're not going to apply to be a forklift driver. If you have a background driving forklift operations, you're not going to apply for a teaching job or a retail job. So people can only realistically apply for what they have experience in. And what really, really angers me about the system, and I still think this is missing in the debate, is the sanctions culture in the DWP. You know, people who read the Daily Mail, I mean, who take in what they say as gospel, will believe that claimants just get free money and that is it. It's one of the biggest distortions about our system. It's true that people get money from the state, but there are strict obligations. And yet we have a government who want to make those obligations even more hardline. I think Kendall and Reeves are trying to outdo the Tories, and they're I think they're a disgrace. I think they're heartless. I think they're showing an utter callousness. And of course, they'll use euphemisms. We're trying to help people into work. We want to give opportunities. So, you know, it sounds positive. It sounds like something beneficial. But they're coupling that with this aggressive sanction culture. And the fact of the matter is, many disabled claimants, particularly, I think all claimants, but particularly disabled claimants, feel like they're being stigmatized. They feel like they're being punished. They feel like they're being treated like criminals doing community service. Some people might say that's hyperbole, and they might say, oh, but that's not happening. But try being in their shoes. I'm not signing on at the moment, but I have signed on. I know what it's like. And almost as soon as you're sat down, they get into your obligations and you have to do this 35-hour job search. And they get into this thing about um, it's looking for work is like having a job. So you have to treat it like a job. But if you actually do the maths on it, if you're a single person, you're actually paid less in I really don't like using the term benefits, and I'll come back to that. But you're paid less in universal credit than you would be if you're actually in a job. If you actually do the maths on it, what you're paid, I think the figure is 390 something. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But if you do the maths on that, that works out far less than the minimum wage. That's per month. So you're being asked to do a 35-hour a week job search. If you do the maths on it, it doesn't add up. In other words, assuming that 35-hour a week job search is an actual job, you'd be paid a couple of quid. That's what it worked out at. And these are the sort of things I think the wider public aren't aware of. Um, I do think that public attitudes in Britain have changed because of a variety of things, the Great Recession and then the pandemic. More people have had to rely on the system. Perhaps if there's anything good could be said of all of this, more people are now understanding and empathetic. You still get people come out of the woodwork and say, we need to crack down on the fraudsters. I agree. But those extreme cases you hear about are just that, extreme. So I don't know, some guy claiming thousands and thousands of pounds for four different children by three different marriages, just as an example, or a criminal gang raking in tens of thousands. That is awful. You know, it's unfair on the taxpayer, and those people should be punished, criminally punished. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is tarring everyone with the same brush. That doesn't work in any other area, and it's the same with welfare. You just can't say that because some people abuse the system, all claimants should be treated the same. It also doesn't take into account the fact that sometimes sanctions are handed out due to administrative error. For example, there's been a computer glitch or a DWP staff member's made a mistake and someone has been overpaid. They are then treated as if they've done that deliberately when actually that was no fault of their own. Um, I really do see a situation, you know, we had the postmaster scandal. I see a situation where lots of claimants will be punished for something they have not done. Um, Whether it will be a postmaster level scandal, I don't know, because this has been going on for years. You know, we've had situations where terminally ill people have been told that they're fit to work. Kind of reminds you of the Foreign Office hostile environment policy. Well, in the DWP, they create this hostile environment. You know, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but almost feels like they're trying to make it deliberately unpleasant so that people will voluntarily sign off. Now, I can't prove that, but wouldn't it all surprise me? Um, I don't think Kendall and Reeves have any compassion for disabled claimants at all. I think Kendall is just trying to pitch to reform voters. I'm not so sure what her seat majority is like, but it's utterly contemptible. I really have no respect for that woman. I think that she has been utterly callous. And Starmer has to take a lot of the blame. You know, he's prime minister. He's the buck stopped to him. So Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, and Liz Kendall will have a lot to answer for if you know claimants are pushed over the edge, which is very plausible. You know, they're going to be feeling huge anxiety over money they may lose. That's money they rely on. Um, And even with these concessions, even saying it won't take effect till November 26th and so on, it's it's the language that's being used that I think people have a problem with, and it's the things that aren't being spoken about. It's about the sanction culture. What I would do, I wouldn't get rid of sanctions 100%. Obviously, if people are getting money, there need to be some obligations. But I would definitely tone it down significantly. I would give far less power to DWP staff to throw around sanctions like confetti. I think there are some DWP staff members, I'm not going to say all of them, but I think some of them are just mini tyrants who get a kick out of throwing out sanctions. Um, you know, that's not everyone. I've dealt with advisors who are decent, and you can tell that they want to treat you like a client as opposed to, you know, looking down on you. But the system, I think, is designed to be punitive, and yet it was set up under the Attlee government as a safety mechanism. That's what it should be about. Increasingly, governments, and this isn't the first time Labour's done it. It done it under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown as well. So no one should feel that Labour is any more compassionate than the Tories are on this. Um, in terms of the vote, the Tories voted against it probably because they don't think it goes far enough. And the Liberal Democrats, I hope, they voted against it for moral reasons, the same reason as the Labour Rebels did. I'm disappointed in my MP, Lewis Atkinson. I won't be voting for him. I've spoke to the guy on a few occasions. You know, honestly, he comes across as a decent man, but unfortunately, he's just towing the party line with this. Um, he says he's listening to disabled claimants. I know that he got a petition I signed from the Trussell Trust, but it sounds like he's towing the line and he's making just these sort of sound bites about we'll continue to listen to people during the protest. I want it to be more clear than that. I want it to be clear that he was voting against the bill and he hasn't. He supported it. Um, and he's been very reluctant to speak out the way some of his colleagues have. So I'm not impressed by that at all. Um, So I'll leave it there. But I'm saddened and depressed at the approaches the Labour government has taken. That I wasn't naive. I didn't think that Labour would be. I knew there was a possibility Labour would be like this. I guess I'm disappointed that they've been as hardline as they are. And like I said, there's all these euphemisms. We want to help people back into work. Am I saying it's all bad? No. If there is more training programs provided, if there is opportunities that mean people aren't losing money, then that's a good thing. I'm not against that. But what I am disappointed by is the fact that Labour continue to push this aggressive sanction culture, that there are still serious threats to people losing money that they rely on. That's going to force people into poverty. And there's been no change in the language from the Tory days. Um, Kendall isn't coming out and saying strivers versus scroungers, but she may as well. The way she approaches this is entirely about. I was disgusted when she said there are thousands and thousands of disabled claimants who are able to work. Now, of course, there are disabled people who have abilities, and it is important to look at that as well. But the reality is, for example, if someone suffers fibromyalgia, my sister does, that is a very uncomfortable and painful condition. You cannot do a 9 to 5 job, you know. So I don't think that Liz Kendall understands it. I think she's only interested in looking tough, and it's a disgrace. Same with Rachel Reeves. The way they talk about the unemployed, the condescending, callous way they talk about claimants disgusts me. And Starmer as their boss, the buck stops with him. I'll put a link to this. Final thing, I said I don't like the term benefits. I don't, because it gives the impression that you're kind of getting like, if you're a member of a club and you kind of get free parking or something. I've never liked the term benefits because it kind of gives this impression, it feeds into the something for nothing narrative, which is not accurate. There is no claimant that has no obligations whatsoever, none. Even disabled claimants who don't have to go into the job centre and don't have to engage in a job search, they're still under pressure to get letters from the doctor. The doctor then has to show that to the DWP. And, Kendall and Reeves think they know better than medical professionals. But even then, um, I know my sister's been in situations, I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning this, where, for example, she's been told that she has a phone interview. She's waiting for it at the right time, and then they're an hour late without even an apology. So there's clear double standards. DWP staff can mess around. My own experience, I have to be honest, the advisors I've dealt with have been civil and polite, but I do think there is a culture in the system which is designed to be punitive, and it pisses me off because you expect this from the Tories. But this is meant to be a Labour government. Labour should be much more compassionate on this issue. Um, I welcome opportunities. I welcome, people being able to go to job interviews and take opportunities without losing DWP money, without losing universal credit. But this doesn't say anything about the ongoing aggressive sanction culture. And there's very little focus and debate on the languages being used. The fact of the matter is, claimants just feel like they're being stigmatized. And I do think, the government alone has a majority. In many areas, they are being tested by reform. And I think it's a cynical way to appeal to reform voters. The average reform voter probably believes that people just get free benefit money, and they're ignorant about that. That is not the case at all. I suggest they try being in someone else's shoes before, coming out with that viewpoint. That is not the case at all. This has been a longer video, but I think the issues are important. I'm just disgusted by the approach the government takes to this. Is it all bad? No, but even with the watering down, it's very clear that Kendall and Reeves, they're battle axes. They just want, let's see how hard we could be on the unemployed. Um, it's contemptible. Shame on you, Liz Kendall. Shame on you, Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves, who lied on her CV, you know, MPs get perks. Isn't that benefit fraud? So it's a double standards of it.